Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, and today I have another story for you for Saturday Stories. Now, I am sure that you remember this clip. I'm having surgery. That's right, I'm having surgery. And if you have not seen my last video, because this is actually video number 2 on my story, my big story, you can find the first story or the first part of the story down in the description below, where I basically tell you about my injury. This video, however, is going to be about my experience going through workman's comp. So at the end of the last video, I talked a little bit about how I finally got in the mindset that maybe workman's comp was the best thing to do. It was the best option that I needed to go with. The injury was not getting better. There was nothing that my manager was saying that was working. There was nothing that the medical team was saying to do that was working. There was nothing that I was doing that was working, or the suggestions just around anyone that I was around was not working for the injury. And no matter what I tried, it still hurt. So talking to the medical people at the job, go figure, I had to set up an appointment to come on a completely different day because, and I'm sure I mentioned it a little bit in the last video, they have trained professionals to be there because the job is not necessarily like the safest. So with that being said, they didn't have those people scheduled to work during the shift that I worked. So they weren't on site when I needed them. So I had to schedule an appointment to come in at a different shift to be able to talk to these people. So talking to these people, I was like, okay, well, is this something that I should do? And they were like, yes. So we went ahead and set it up, and I went to this physical therapy center or whatever to talk to a doctor. And these are the exercises that he did. So I don't remember if I showed you any of these in the last video or not, but I'm gonna re-go over them. So he would have me do this, which makes my thumb go numb. And then he would have me do this, which tends to make my thumb and my pinky go numb. And then he would have me either push down on a finger, or I'd have to like squeeze his hands. And in doing that, we found out that my right hand, the injured hand, was significantly weaker than my left hand. And then he would like take my wrist and just kind of like roll it around so that he could feel the popping, and just kind of like mess around with it in different ways. He'd have me do this little thing and this little thing and like this, just to kind of see what hurt and what didn't hurt. And then after a while of sitting there doing different tests like that, doing that really hurts my hand. He was like, okay, well, we're gonna have you go with the physical therapist. So I was like, okay. So we set up an appointment for me to meet the physical therapist, and then he was just gonna kind of like collaborate or get with the physical therapist to kind of like go back and forth to see my treatment and how I was doing, and you know, whatever. I had 2 physical therapists. There was a guy and there was a girl. I sat down with the guy first, and I told him about the incident, what happened, why I was there, and he was like, okay. So he would take his fingers and he would like feel all up right here on my wrist, and he'd rub it around to like kind of feel the inside of my wrist or whatever, and he would just massage my entire forearm Well, there is a tendon that's like along this area that when I rub my hand up against it, it goes numb all the way up into my thumb, and sometimes it'll hurt like in this area. So he would do that, and that would hurt and cause my hand to go numb. He also would like go like this and then like circle my wrist to kind of like get a feel for what was going on. And he would just like, basically, he would just like massage the whole area. And that's how he came to his conclusion. That's all he did. And he was like, you have tendinitis. He jumped at the first thought that he thought of and was like, okay, that's what you have, so that's what we'll treat you for. There was no x-rays done. There was no like second opinion. There was no testing of any sort. It was just him feeling around on my wrist and looking at what he was doing and how that was causing me pain. And when I did have the pain and the numbness and the tingliness in my fingers, how that presented itself. So I'm not necessarily happy with that, because I felt like it was a rush diagnosis, first of all. Second of all, I don't feel like that's accurate, because there's a lot of different things out there that you can have that share the same symptoms. So how are you going to massage my wrist, feel some of these symptoms, and be like, oh, that's tendinitis, that's what you have, let's treat you for that? How do you know that that is tendinitis versus something different? Like, that cannot be the one and only way that you can tell if that is tendinitis. Now, obviously, I went with it because he's the therapist, I'm not. So if you're telling me that that's what I have, then that's what I'm gonna live by. So for like 2-3 years, I lived thinking that I had tendinitis. And from what I understood, I could be wrong. I didn't do too much research on it, but from what I understood, you could do physical therapy, but it was something that if it was bad enough, the only way that you can get rid of it was to have surgery. I then later found out that that wasn't necessarily the case. So I was so relieved when I found that out, because I was dreading having surgery to fix that, and I didn't want to have tendinitis the rest of my life. But I recently found out that there are things that you can do that help tendinitis, so that surgery is not the only outcome, and living with it the rest of your life is not the only outcome. I'm not going to go in too much detail about that, because I have not done like extended research on tendinitis, so I don't know like the full do's and don'ts and what happens next kind of thing. Yes, I've lived with it for 2-3 years now, but that was the extent of it. I have tendinitis, it hurts sometimes, so I wear a brace and I move on with my day. So with that being said, the first thing that he would do when I would go to physical therapy is there was this lotion that had like these little pieces of like grain in them or whatever, and it was supposed to help massage the skin. So he would give me a deep tissue massage with this lotion all over my wrist and hand. And he would turn my skin red, and it would hurt, obviously, because it's tendinitis. So my wrist and hand were very tender. Well, then after that, he used something called a TENS unit, which I do have. So this is a TENS unit. Basically, you have these little pads that are sticky on one side and fabricy on the other, and they have these wires that come into that are like in between the sticky layer and the fabric layer, and you hook the wire to a cord that hooks up to a remote that looks like this in the top. And basically what that does is this creates an electric shock that goes through the cord into the pad, that basically massages the muscles and the tendons. That uses shock therapy basically to realign the tendons in whatever it is that's hurting. You can place it on practically anything, just not your face. I know that there are some things that you can't put it on, and your face is one of them. So don't do that. And what he always did is one cord has two ends. So you have the ability to hook up one cord to 2 pads. And when you did that, I'm going to show you, so I'm opening it. So you have one long cord, but then it splits off into 2 at the end so that you can have 2 pads. And going through the physical therapist, if he put one here, then the other one that's on that same cord would go on the opposite side so that it wasn't the same cord right next to each other. I don't know the significance behind that, or if it's just safer that way, or if it's to get more control over more areas on one setting and then the other side has a different setting, or I don't like speed. But he, after massaging the deep tissue massage out of my wrist, almost said ankle, out of my wrist, he would hook me up to a TENS unit. And so I would be sitting there with my hand either open like this or down like this for a while, doing that. Which I liked using the TENS unit when I was in physical therapy. What I didn't like is the fact that the TENS unit was not used just on one person. It was used on everyone. So, and what I've learned using it myself, especially that often, is that the sticky part begins to go away. And what the physical therapist did, not just him, she did it too, was they would put water underneath it. And then they would stick it to your skin, and then they would turn it on, which I didn't like because it's an electrical current going into your tendons to kind of realign them a little bit, or like adjust the situation to like ease the pain. How are you going to put some water on that? So whenever the TENS unit section or portion of the physical therapy was over, I would have red spots on my arm from the TENS unit, which you're not supposed to have after using them. So that was now 2 things that I disagreed with the physical therapists. I did not agree with how quickly they came to a conclusion on what was wrong with me. And I did not agree with the way that they used the TENS unit. They didn't have it too high, but I did read the instructions when I got this one. This is new because I got this year, and when I used it with the physical therapist, that was 3 years ago. So I didn't know it then, but I do know it now. It's not supposed to hurt. And if it hurts at any point, you're supposed to turn it off, readjust, and then turn it back on. Well, it did definitely hurt from time to time having them do it. Mainly because they left it on there with water. And you're not supposed to do that. But they did it to make it stick. And it's like, if you have to resort to that, just get new shock pads. It's not that hard. But anyway, aside from it hurting from time to time, I did really like using the TENS unit. It did help my wrist feel better. Other things that they had me do, there was this machine that had like these little grain pieces in it, and there was like a fan that heated it up and made it go all over the place, and I had to stick my hand in it and kind of like do this motion and just like move my wrist around while it's inside of that, and it's supposed to help soothe the tendon in my wrist, plus adding the heat to it. In the end, yes, the heat did make the pain worse at first because it shot straight up my arm. But in the end, having heat on it soothes it so much. So, you know, having the heat from that machine really, really helped. And what I did like about that machine is that it left my skin very, very soft and smooth. They also had this wax machine that I basically stuck my whole arm into, and I took it out and my whole arm was just in wax. I really liked putting it in the wax. That felt amazing. Plus, I thought it was really cool because I was made out of wax for a minute. But then they would remove that. Other things that they would have me do, they had this machine that had different like tools or different settings that you could change out. So one was a wheel, and I had to use this hand to do different things. So there was a little wheel that I had to go like this, which over time really hurt. There was another one where I had to go forward twice and then backward twice, and then forward twice, backward twice, which also hurt. Then there was another one where it was just like two pieces that I just squeezed together, and it would just keep going like that. Now, when the injury first happened, my wrist popped an awful lot. So every single time I went like this, it would pop. Or every single time I went like this or like this, it would pop. And squeezing it would strain this entire area right here, and it would pop. I do this a lot, trying to get it to pop. And cooking with the injury has definitely proven to be difficult. For the most part, I can use a knife and a fork, but when I'm holding something for too long, my wrist just feels very, very tired, and I almost just don't want to hold whatever it is that I'm trying to hold. Also, cooking with like tongs is very hard because I have to squeeze them together and hold it in that position, and that hurts really bad to hold that. So certain things like that I have to stay away from a little bit, or try to use my other hand. The other thing that they would have me do is there was this little push thing, like a cart that had slots for weights, and I have to push a certain amount of weight and pull it back to kind of utilize the strength in my wrist. And then there was another one that I had to do where it was this crate that had weights inside of it, and then I had to pick the crate up off the floor and put it on the first platform, and then I had to move it from the first platform to the second one, and from the second to the third, and from the third to the fourth, and back down to the floor, one by one. Well, each time I went up a thing, it would get higher and higher and higher. So I was having to lift much higher with my wrist, and that killed me. So there was something that the doctor himself had set. Restrictions for weight was one of those things. When I first got injured, he was like, okay, well, we're gonna have you at a 20-pound limit. So if you can't do anything at your job that's 20 pounds, then you can't go to work, because you're only cleared to be able to lift 20 pounds. So I was like, okay, I can live with that. That's something, whatever. If they have something that I can do that's 20 pounds or less, I can go. Unfortunately, my job did not have anything that was 20 pounds or less because it's packages. There's no guarantee that I would get a route that has nothing heavy on it. And in order to get everything done, I couldn't necessarily just pick and choose what I was doing. And I couldn't just take a partial thing, and they just didn't have anything that I could do. So I was out of work. And then on top of that, when I would go to the physical therapist, we would discuss that I had a 20-pound limit, and they were like, okay, we're going to start you off at 25. I did not like that, because if my doctor is clearing me, like my workman's comp doctor is clearing me for 20 pounds, and my workman's comp therapist, physical therapist, is like, no, screw that, we're putting you at 25. Yes, it's only a 5-pound difference, but the doctor said 20 and you're giving me 25. Obviously, he doesn't think that I'm ready to lift more than 20. So why are you having me lift more than 20? So I, more often than not, left physical therapy in a lot of pain because they were having me do things that I wasn't cleared to do in their hopes of getting me out of there. It went back and forth between me having the male and the female. 9 times out of 10, it was the female that I was working with, and then whenever she couldn't, I was working with the guy. But they were on the same page, and collectively, they were consistently having me lift more than whatever the number was that the doctor was clearing me for. So when I went in there and he was like 20 pounds and they put me at 25, I was like, okay, whatever. And that whole week I was at 25. And then there was one day out of that week where they moved me up to 30. And then I go back and I see him and he's like, okay, well now you're cleared for 25. I'm barely cleared for 20. Why are you putting me at 25 already? Well, of course, now that I'm at 25, the physical therapists are like, no, let's put you at 30, 35. And it was a never-ending pattern of just that. When I was cleared for 30 pounds, they were like, no, let's put you at 40. No, I'm supposed to be at 30. Why are you having me lift 40? And then the doctor, he kept, like, every time he gave me clearance to lift higher than what I was before, it was always 5 pounds more. Like, he gradually built it up by 5 pounds each time. So every time he thought I was okay to move up, he'd be like, okay, 5 more. The physical therapist was like all over the place. There were times where they would be like, okay, well, let's put you 5 pounds more than what they want. And then there was other times where they're like 15 pounds more. And I'm like, how is that acceptable, first of all? What is the point in him clearing me or restricting me to a certain spot or a point or whatever if you're not going to follow that? Like, I'm not at work right now. There's nothing that I can do that's under 50 pounds. So the only place aside from home that I'd be using these restrictions is in physical therapy. So why is it that physical therapy is going over the restrictions when the doctor clearly said one thing? And it was always hard to kind of like pinpoint how my wrist was doing, because there's a lot of times where if I'm just sitting there and I'm not doing anything, it doesn't bother me at all. It's as if I don't have an injury. But then the more I'm using it, the more I can feel it, and the worse that it gets. And my injury has brought me to tears a lot before. It's hard to say 100% of the time how it's doing. I have a range of like feeling in it. All 5 fingers have tendencies to go numb and tingly. Sometimes it's not even the finger, it's just like the palm. Or it'll go through the palm up into 1 or 2 fingers, but not the other ones. A lot of the times the pain is like right here or right here. And then other times it shoots straight down. And sometimes it goes all the way through. So, I mean, it depends on what I'm doing and how long I'm doing whatever it is that I'm doing. And when they were putting me at a higher, like, weight limit than what the doctor was clearing, I was straining my wrist a lot. And they had me lifting 50 pounds when the doctor restricted me to 40. And so I was getting really fed up with the fact that they were doing that. And it didn't matter how many times I said, hey, I don't think I'm ready for that. Then they, like, the therapist and the doctor talked to each other. And then through all of that pattern, they were like, hey, well, I think you're ready to go back to work. So now here's what another issue that gets brought up, because it has nothing to do with the workman's comp, but it has everything to do with the fact that when I go in there, one of the things that they do is check your blood pressure to make sure that everything is where it needs to be, and mine was always high. So there was a lot of times when they were like, okay, well, you need to go to the doctor because this is concerning. So I was like, okay, well, I will get a doctor. So I got a doctor, like an actual PCP, when I was out on workman's comp. And I got a PCP because the workman's comp doctor was recommending that I get one so that I can fix my blood pressure situation, because I have high blood pressure. Well, there's a thing that happens a lot, and it's typically when I'm more stressed that I realize that it happens. But there's times where my hand, they go completely numb to the point where I cannot feel them. And when I'm looking at them, I do not realize that I'm looking at my own hand. And when those things are happening, I tend to lose my vision, anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours. Well, this particular morning when I had physical therapy, I was having one of those moments where my hand started feeling really distant from me. I could see that it was here, but it felt like it was on the other side of the room. And I lost all feeling in my hand. And I went blind for a little bit. And then right after I got my vision back, I had to go to the appointment. So when I went in there and they were asking how I was doing, and she could tell that I was not feeling the greatest, I told her what was going on and all this other stuff. And suddenly they were like, okay, well, let's put a stop to some of these things. And obviously she wrote it in her notes. And when she gave her notes to the physical therapist, when the physical therapist doctor put it in her notes about the whole me losing my vision and the thing with my arm and the blood pressure and all that other stuff, she gave it to the workman's comp doctor. And the workman's comp doctor was concerned about that. So when he cleared me to go back to work, he cleared me for the workman's comp case, but then he put it in his notes that he feels like I should also check with my PCP before going back to work because of this other issue. And that started its own chain of problems. I already felt like I was being a burden on the people that I was living with, because every time I had an appointment, it seemed like someone was getting upset. And when this person was getting upset, it was like a never-ending thing, because there was nothing that I could do or seem to be able to do that made that person not be upset with me in some way, shape, or form. But then whenever that person took the other people in the household to their appointments, they were not as upset. So I felt like it was like a personal attack on me. Like they thought maybe I was faking it, that I just didn't want to be at work, so I have this injury now or whatever. And it just kind of like, it made the whole experience worse for me, which did not help the stress level that I was in, which did not help the situation regarding the PCP. And they were constantly up my ass about bills and, figuring out if I can get back to work and when I was going to get back to work, and telling me their opinion on how they feel like I shouldn't still be out of work and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, why don't you let my injury be its own injury and my own situation handle itself the way that it's going to play through and handle out, and you just be as supportive with me as you are the other people. And unfortunately, I did not get that. So I felt like my injury was a big inconvenience. And I don't know where the other two stand with their injuries, but 3 years later, I am still suffering from my injury. So I'm just looking back on it now, kind of laughing at the fact that they thought it was fake. And if they didn't think it was fake, they did one hell of a job making me feel like that's how they felt. So that was fun. And so with the workman's comp situation and them finally clearing me, you know, for that, they did give me muscle relaxers. Or no, not muscle relaxers. They did give me medicine that would help with the pain. And that stuff put me out. Like, it was a small dosage, but I would take one and I'd be asleep for like 10 hours. So, and within like 30 minutes of me taking the pill, I'd be asleep. So, it did wonders. But now the whole thing about me needing to get my PCP at the time's approval about other medical stuff that had nothing to do with the workman's comp stuff was now blocking me being able to go back to work. So the workman's comp doctor cleared me for workman's comp. Therefore, I should have been able to go back to work. But because the workman's comp doctor was like, well, I'm clearing you for this, but you need to get cleared from your PCP before you can go back to work. Well, because that was on the paperwork when I tried to go back to work, they were like, no, you need to have that approval. So they wouldn't let me come back because of that no. So I said, okay. So I take that to my PCP. And the PCP is refusing to approve anything because he didn't diagnose it. And he was like, you have to take that up with the workman's comp doctor because he's the one that is handling whatever and wants it to be, you know, like finalized or double checked before anything happens with it. So I was going back and forth between my job, the PCP, and the workman's comp doctor. No one's wanting to fill this, like, fix the information. They're not willing to take it out of the paperwork. He's not willing to approve me to go back because of that, or see me or make a diagnosis off of that. And my job wasn't willing to take me back without it being cleared. So I was just like in a freaking loop. And I was like, you know what? I don't want to work at a place anyways who's going to treat me like that. I've been like communicating with you the entire time so that you know what's happening, when it's happening, and what's going on with the injury and the extent of me being able to come back to work. And one little mix-up happens and you're like, okay, well, this has to happen or you're fired. I don't want to work for someone like that because I'm not a robot. I'm a human being with a life and my own issues and my own problems and my own bills that I have to pay and take care of and all this other stuff. And before any of that happens, my health has to come first, because if I'm not healthy and I'm unable to do the job, then the job's not going to get done. So I kind of have to take care of myself before I can take care of the other things, you know? And so you as the employer, if you're not going to treat me like I'm a human and acknowledge that sometimes shit happens and people get sick and people get injured and you're just going to act like it's an inconvenience, I'm not going to want to work for you. Point blank, period. Because I'm not a robot. So I was like, I'm not going to deal with them. So I quit. And because I quit, I technically didn't need the approval anymore from the workman's comp, so I just let that be what its thing was. I took it as they approved me to go back. It's whatever. And then while I was still living in the area that I was living, and I had to have this man be my PCP, I was like, you know what? Why don't you just diagnose me? I was trying to come to you for some of these things anyways that you keep skipping over. So instead of skipping over them, let's diagnose these things and then you can approve it. Well, I ended up going to like some neuro doctors for my eyes and got that situation all types of settled. So, I mean, if you guys want to hear more on that part of the story specifically, let me know down in the comments below, and I will do another story talking about my other health problems and all of that other stuff. But it's not relevant to the rest of the story. But that's basically the part of the story where I was going through physical therapy and workman's comp. And I do still have a lot more of the story that I would like to tell you. But I'm not going to get into any of the rest of that story in this video. So if you are following the story and you like it, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.